It was one of those cold, biting March nights, the kind where the chill seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I had just stumbled through the door after a long shift, exhaustion hitting me like a ton of bricks. All I wanted was a moment of peace, a cold beer in hand and the comfort of silence. I sank onto the couch, eyes closed, hoping the quiet would wash away the stress clinging to me. But peace, as it turned out, was the last thing that night had in store. I took a long sip, barely bothering to turn on the TV. The house was calm, quiet, almost too still. I felt an odd prickling at the back of my mind, but I brushed it off, blaming it on the exhaustion. As I flipped mindlessly through the channels, the screen suddenly went dark. Every light in the house flickered once, then died with a sharp, electric pop that echoed through the silence. My heart raced, even though I was used to these outages. Our house had a habit of losing power for no apparent reason, but that night it felt different, ominous. Curious, I stepped outside to check if the outage had affected the neighborhood. As the door closed softly behind me, I glanced around. A few houses were still lit up, their windows glowing softly in the dark. The problem was just my house. Frustrated, I turned back, but as I reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. My stomach twisted. I tried again, rattling the handle harder, but it was locked. My heart began to pound as I pounded on the door, calling out to my wife. Silence. Panic set in, clawing up my throat as I raced to the back door, locked, every entry sealed shut. A deep chill crept into my bones. Something was terribly wrong. My pulse raced as I made my way around to the side of the house, hoping to check the breaker. But then I froze. The garden hose, which I'd coiled neatly just hours before, was unspooled and strewn haphazardly across the yard. It lay limp on the grass, snaking toward the breaker box, its purpose clear as day. Someone had been here. Someone had cut the power, and they were still inside. Cold dread took hold as I crept to a nearby window, peering into the darkness of my own home. Two beams of light swayed through the shadows, flashlights dancing like restless spirits, illuminating unfamiliar shapes in my living room. My mind went numb with fury and terror. Intruders were rifling through my home as if they owned it. I reached instinctively for my phone, but my pocket was empty. I'd left it on the couch in my rush for comfort. A curse slipped through my clenched teeth. I knew I should run to the neighbors for help, call the police, get someone here fast. But a horrible thought seized me, gripping me tighter than fear itself. My wife was still inside, asleep and unaware, a silent target in her own home. I couldn't leave her there, vulnerable to whatever was lurking in the dark. Grabbing a handful of rocks from the garden, I hurled one at our bedroom window. The silence shattered. A second rock, then a third, until I saw her startled face appear in the window, her eyes wide with confusion. I gestured frantically, mouthing to her to hide, to stay silent. She vanished from view, disappearing into the shadows. With my heart hammering, I sprinted to my neighbor's door, pounding on it with desperate urgency. After explaining, barely catching my breath, I used his phone to call the police, my voice a mix of rage and terror. As I waited on his porch, every second felt like a lifetime. The dark consuming my fears, my hopes, all but the raw dread clawing at my chest. Finally, the police arrived, their flashing lights piercing the dark. I ran out to meet them, leading them to the back of the house. They swept inside, weapons drawn, but it was too late. The back door hung ajar, swinging slightly, a mocking reminder of our vulnerability. Whoever had been there had vanished into the night, leaving only the chilling echo of their intrusion behind. My wife's face was pale, her hands shaking as she clung to me. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, each word cutting deeper than the last. She described how moments after hiding, she heard the bedroom door creak open. A stranger's heavy steps entered, stopping only a few feet away, and then she heard it. The unmistakable metallic click of a gun cocking, the stranger standing motionless, listening. She lay there, hidden and paralyzed, while the intruder lingered, as though savoring the terror he had instilled. She was certain he had heard me throwing the rocks, and it may have saved her life. To this day, I can't shake the guilt, the chilling what-ifs that haunt me. What if I hadn't gone outside? What if I hadn't thrown the rocks? Even now, when I walk through that door every night, there's a part of me that wonders if I'll feel that same terrifying chill again, because we never did move. We still live in that house, and every creak, every shadow in the corner of my eye, it feels like they're still there, watching, waiting. It had been a stormy Friday night, the kind that sets a heavy, foreboding mood over the world, making everything seem dark and twisted. The wind howled like a beast, slamming against the house, rattling the windows as if the elements themselves were trying to tear it apart. Outside, the rain lashed against the glass in sheets, so thick it looked like a wall of water, blocking out everything beyond. The storm felt alive, as though it were watching, waiting, but inside, in the dim glow of the basement, it was oddly peaceful, almost cozy in its own eerie way. I had just moved back in with my parents, defeated by the struggles of life. My older brother, the golden child, had always been the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. I'd spent years trying to follow in his footsteps, but I always seemed to be a few steps behind. It wasn't that I resented him, it was just the way life worked out. And now, after years of trying to make it on my own, I was back home, living in the basement, tucked away from the world like some forgotten shadow. My parents were out for the weekend, leaving me to my own devices. The basement was far from a typical dreary storage space. It had a sort of strange charm to it. A small kitchen, a bathroom, an office, and a bedroom with a bed that, while small, was just enough to make me feel like I was still somewhat independent. There was a TV with my old video games, which felt like a small piece of my old life. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep me distracted from the relentless frustration of being stuck. That night, I had settled in with a beer, the warmth of the storm outside the perfect backdrop to my peaceful escape. The wind outside roared, pushing against the house, but here in my basement, I was sheltered from it all. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the storm wash over me, the rhythm of the rain against the windows lulling me towards sleep. But then, it happened. The lights flickered, and without warning, everything went black. The sudden silence that followed felt unnatural. The hum of electricity, the comforting glow of the lights, all of it disappeared in an instant. I groaned in annoyance. The storm had probably knocked out the power, I thought. I didn't want to deal with it. I was tired, too tired to be bothered. I didn't even know where the breaker was, and honestly, I didn't care. It was just a power outage, nothing to worry about. I closed my eyes again, trying to ignore the dark, empty space around me. But the quiet was unsettling. There was something about it that didn't sit right, something off. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered like a shadow. And then I heard it. A loud thud. Unnatural, heavy. It hit one of the basement windows with such force that I jumped, my heart racing in my chest. My first thought was that a tree branch had fallen, or maybe the storm had knocked something loose. But this was different. It was too sharp, too deliberate, like someone had thrown something. Reluctantly, I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to navigate through the pitch-black room. Every step felt like it echoed in the silence, like the house itself was holding its breath. As I approached the window, I held my phone up, squinting through the glass, trying to see through the darkness outside. And then I saw it. My blood ran cold. There, pressed against the window, was a face. A man's face, pale and drenched from the rain, eyes wide open, staring straight at me. For a moment, time stopped. My heart stuttered in my chest as we locked eyes, and then just as quickly he moved away from the window. I stumbled back, almost dropping my phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What had I just seen? The terror in my chest was overwhelming. My mind raced, but before I could process what had happened, another sound reached my ears. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking above me. Someone was upstairs, in my house. The panic surged within me. I was alone, and there were strangers in my home, but there was more. I knew they weren't just breaking in. They knew I was down here. I froze, my mind spinning. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but then I remembered. The power outage had cut off the Wi-Fi. My phone had no signal down here in the basement. I was trapped alone and cut off from the outside world. There was no way to contact anyone, no way to call for help. The only thing I could do was wait. But waiting meant the strangers would have time to find me, and they were coming. I tried to think, tried to calm myself, but the panic was like a vice around my chest, squeezing tighter with each passing second. I couldn't just sit here, not while they were upstairs. I needed to get out. Quietly, I moved toward the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat. I reached the top and peered around the stairwell. My breath hitched. There were 3 figures moving through the house, their flashlights cutting through the dark. I watched, frozen in place. One of them turned, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across their body, and I saw it. A gun. My blood turned to ice. One of them was carrying a gun. I held my breath, not daring to move. They were murmuring to each other in low voices, their words muffled by the heavy storm outside. Then one of them said something that made my stomach drop. "Alex is in the basement. Go find him. How did they know my name?" My mind raced, the world spinning around me. They were looking for me. I had to get out, I had to move, but I was cornered. If they found me, I didn't know what would happen. I couldn't take the chance. I backed away from the stairs as quietly as I could, every muscle in my body frozen with fear. I couldn't let them hear me, couldn't let them know where I was. I searched frantically, looking for a way out, but the basement was sealed tight. All the windows were locked from the inside. There was no escape. But then I saw it, a stool, sitting by the corner. Without thinking, I grabbed it and dragged it over to one of the basement windows. It was my only shot. I climbed up, smashing my elbow through the glass, sending shards flying everywhere. The pain in my arm was sharp, but it didn't matter. I had no time to feel it. I pulled myself through the broken window, feeling the glass cut into my skin, but I didn't stop. The rain soaked me instantly, but I didn't care. I ran, slipping in the mud, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to check if they were chasing me. I just ran as fast as I could until I reached a neighbor's house, and finally I got a signal on my phone. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely dial the police, but I managed to get through. By the time the officers arrived and searched the house, it was too late. Whoever had broken in was long gone, leaving nothing but chaos behind. They'd taken everything, stolen more than I could count. And the power outage? It had been no accident. It was intentional. The police couldn't offer any answers. No fingerprints, no clues, just an empty house with all the signs of a brutal robbery. My parents were furious. They didn't understand how it could have happened, why I hadn't done more. They threatened to kick me out, to send me away. But I begged them. I couldn't leave. I had nowhere to go. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could stay either. Every night, I wonder. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights makes my heart race. I can still see his face pressed against the window, and I can still hear the voice, calling my name from upstairs. They knew where I was. They knew my name. And that thought haunts me. Who were they? Why did they target me? What would have happened if I hadn't escaped? The answers are out there, waiting, and I can't shake the feeling that they'll come back for me. Every storm that hits now feels like a warning, a reminder that I'm not alone. I can never forget what happened that night, and I'll never stop looking over my shoulder. I'm a security guard and I work the night shift at a quiet suburban warehouse far away from any bustling city or town. It's as lonely as it sounds. My job isn't complicated. I walk the aisles, check the locks, and make sure no one's trying to steal anything. But there are nights when something feels. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. The rain hammered down in sheets, making the windows rattle and the roof groan under the pressure. I checked my phone, watching the storm updates. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of driving home in those conditions, but I told myself I could make it through. It was eerily quiet. The only sound was the occasional hum of the lights above and the distant thrum of thunder. But as the hours ticked by, the storm outside grew more intense, and the power inside the warehouse began to flicker. At first it was nothing serious, just a few moments of darkness, but it came back each time. Then, it happened. The lights went out completely. The warehouse was plunged into a suffocating darkness so thick it felt like it could swallow me whole. My heart skipped a beat. I cursed under my breath, realizing that the responsibility for fixing it now rested solely on my shoulders. It wasn't a difficult task. Just unplug some machinery, check the breakers, and get the lights back on. But the thought of navigating this massive dark building alone made my skin crawl. My flashlight flickered on, the beam of light cutting through the oppressive dark like a tiny sliver of hope. My footsteps echoed off the metal shelves, each one sounding louder than the last. It was unsettling. The silence in the warehouse was unnatural, and each creak of the building felt like an unseen presence was lurking just out of sight. As I began my task, I heard it. A loud metallic clatter, distant but unmistakable. It rang out from somewhere deep within the warehouse. I froze. My mind tried to reason with itself, telling me it was just the storm, the wind shaking the building, but the sound, it didn't belong. I should have ignored it. I should have gone straight to the breakers, but curiosity gnawed at me. I walked toward the source of the noise, my flashlight shaking in my hand. As I turned a corner, my breath caught in my throat. A faint beam of light darted across the shelves, moving just like my own flashlight. It clicked off as quickly as I saw it, disappearing into the dark. I blinked, staring at the spot where the light had been. No one should have been here. I was the only one on shift tonight. I took a step forward, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. I called out into the empty aisles, but no response came. It was just me. Or so I thought. When I reached the spot where I had seen the light, the aisle was empty. Just rows and rows of crates stacked high, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. I wasn't imagining it. I knew what I had seen. My gut twisted. Something was wrong. I considered calling the police, but then I thought better of it. What would I tell them? That I saw a light, but no one was here? They'd think I was losing it. Still, something wasn't right. I shook my head and pushed the thought aside. I had a job to do. The lights wouldn't fix themselves. But just as I made my way toward the circuit room, I was hit by a smell. It was metallic, stale, like rusted iron mixed with stagnant water. The stench was coming from one of the loading bays where crates were piled high, floor to ceiling. My flashlight flickered across the polished concrete floor, and that's when I saw it. 2 sets of wet footprints. They were fresh, and they led into one of the storage aisles. My stomach twisted, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. The logical part of me told me to leave, to call the police, to get out. But my job was to protect this place. I couldn't just leave. I followed the trail, my feet moving despite the fear clawing at my insides. The closer I got, the more I heard it. The faintest whispers. Soft, almost drowned out by the storm outside. It sounded like 2 people talking, but the words were unintelligible, carried on the wind of some unseen presence. The tone was tense, urgent, like something was about to go terribly wrong. I clicked off my flashlight and held my breath. I gripped my taser, praying it would be enough if I had to defend myself. I crept forward, my heart pounding in my ears, and turned the corner. Nothing. No one was there. The whisper stopped. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I stood in the empty aisle, my flashlight trembling in my hand. How? How could they have vanished so quickly? My thoughts were racing. This wasn't just a glitch. It was something much worse. But I couldn't just abandon my post. I had to get the lights back on. I couldn't risk losing my job over this. I found my way to the circuit room and began working on the breakers, my hands trembling as I fumbled in the dark. The silence was maddening, the weight of it pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. And then it happened. A scraping sound, faint at first, but growing louder, closer. My flashlight swung toward the noise. There, just a few feet away, was a crowbar, a metal tool lying innocently on the floor, but it hadn't been there before. I had just walked past this spot. Whoever was in here with me, they were armed. I called out, hoping to bluff whoever was out there. "I'm armed," I yelled, though my words felt hollow. My finger tightened on the taser, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this place a moment longer. Just as I turned to leave, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the building. My heart skipped a beat. The unmistakable sound of running footsteps followed, growing louder, faster. I spun around and ran. I could hear them behind me, the footsteps pounding the concrete like the beat of a war drum. Whoever they were coming for me, and they were fast. My only thought was to keep running, to get to the exit and never look back. I darted through the aisles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the footsteps fading. The sound of pursuit slowly vanished. I dared to stop, my chest heaving, and for a moment I thought I had escaped. I made my way to the exit and stepped outside into the pouring rain, my legs shaking. My heart was still racing, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I called the police. The words tumbled out of my mouth in a panic. "Please, come quickly." When they arrived, they searched the place, but the two figures were gone without a trace. The police were helpful, even resetting the power for me, but my boss? He wasn't so understanding. He gave me a hard time for leaving the job early, nearly firing me. I couldn't shake the images from that night. The figures, the crowbar, the whispers. What did they want? Why did they chase me? And the worst part, I still worked the night shift in that very warehouse, but now, at least, I'm not alone. My boss finally started putting a second person on the shift, but no matter how many people are with me, I can never forget the feeling that something is still lurking in those dark aisles, waiting for the next time the lights go out. And I pray that next time, I won't be alone.